my father said, go into real estate and you'll make a lot of money. And I never had any reason not to trust his judgments on things, which are really good. And I said, I will, Dad. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be in real estate. So when I graduated, I needed a job. And so I got a job at Donnelley. But on the weekends and the evenings, I was combing through the newspapers looking for things that I could buy. And I knew what I could buy because I knew how much money down payment I had. And I knew how quickly I had to pay my dad back who gave me the down payment, right? So that would drive my investment criteria. So the moment I graduated was the moment that I committed myself to the real estate business. 4 months after graduating from college, I bought my first deal, which was a 6-flat and a warehouse. And from then on, that would start me in my residential acquisition experience career, so to speak.
Mike Brennan, how are we doing today?
Conrad, I'm doing great. That was a wonderful lunch that we just gave Jack Fraker, guest of honor, lifetime achievement. He's a fantastic professional and really nice guy, too.
That was a lot of fun, and it was great to hear all the interaction and so many questions for you guys as well, you know. Yeah. And he is, I call him the Godfather because he literally is the Godfather of industrial real estate, I feel like.
Yeah.
And just such a knowledgeable guy. And like you and I mentioned, just such a pleasure to be around. What a nice guy. Yep. You don't meet many guys like that have that successful track record that don't have egos, big egos.
Well, when we were doing our little pre-interview, we have a little talk before we do these grass camps on the road. And Lee Galtchuk, who was there today.
Yeah.
After we were done, talking to Jack, she goes, what a nice man. I said, that's how he really is, He's just a great guy.
He is authentic. There's no doubt about it. Well, I appreciate you taking a little time while you're in Big D to swing by the pod.
Sure, absolutely.
And, man, we're going to get into your incredible journey in commercial real estate that, goes to being the co-founder and CEO of First Industrial, and now you're the second largest private owner of industrial real estate in the United States, 572 properties, and of course your tennis prowess. We'll get into that too, right?
Well, if you want to.
Yeah.
I have an exaggerated sense of my powers.
But what I always like to do is talk about your upbringing when I start off with people, because I think that shapes you in life. And I heard a little bit about it today, and I've done a little research on you. And man, it sounds like you had a phenomenal upbringing. Dad, firefighter in Chicago, and kind of just had the work ethic and running side businesses, real estate investing, insurance. And mom was the one pumping you up with be sophisticated, go to get education, and the homemaker, and really running the show at home. Tell me about your childhood, Mike.
Well, I mean, I think I was at a YPO meeting one time, and we did something called Lifelines. And in a lifeline, you tell your story, and then people reflect upon, what the biggest influences were. And I think almost to a person, everybody concluded that we are our mother and our father smoothly amalgamated into a new person, with individual characteristics, bearing more or less, or what your father was or your mother was. So I would say that, what I am today is an amalgamation of my mother and father, obviously, but I think the characteristics of them were that they were the sons and daughters of Irish immigrants that had come off the boat in the 1920s, and like all immigrants, almost all immigrants, they aspire to do something good, better than what they had before.
Yep.
So I think Now it was hard. It's hard to move one generation to the top right away. It takes a little while, but I think my parents, they were hard workers. I think my father's contribution, I think, to what I was an entrepreneur, a man of great business judgment, even though he didn't, wasn't able to have the same opportunities I did, but his instincts were very good. He had a bunch of different jobs. He was a fireman. He was a sometimes real estate investor, owned an insurance business and a tax business. So, he was always thinking about ways in which he could make money.
Yeah.
And, he did it, without the benefit of the education and environments that I would eventually grow up in, or have the opportunities to do. But he did the best that he can. My mother was not that way. He was hard, he could be tough. My mother could be tough too, but more, nicer, let's say, a more easygoing personality, but tough in the way of discipline, that these are the things you do. And she believed that while work was important, so was culture, and so was learning, so was, developing a part of your humanity that lets you have a nicer life.
Yeah.
Right. And so, now, those are my words, not necessarily hers, but that was the effect of what she had on me. And so my father believed the purpose of education was to get a better job. My mother believed the purpose of education was to have a better life. And so both of them were for education, but what they thought it would bring me would be, two different outcomes. So my mother was very keen on, okay, he's going to education. Father less so. But my mother was like, no, you're going to go to the finest high school we can find. And then from her hairdresser, she learned about Campion Jesuit High School in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, and that that was the finest college preparatory that was available in her judgment for me, especially as a Catholic person.
Yeah.
This is a Jesuit boarding school. And then if you'd go away there, you'd get into a great college and you'd have a great life. So she was the one that pushed that. And then from there, I did well in school. I was a good student. And so then I had opportunities to go to, a bunch of different universities. I would eventually go to Notre Dame. Yeah. So, that influence, I think the immigrant experience that they carried, and then they carried, a desire that I would aspire and get the best things America had to offer. And although they didn't have the educational benefits, they knew it was important and they gave it to me. Yeah. And they sacrificed. We didn't have, they saved up money to put me through school, but they would also require that I do the same. So you're going to have summer jobs. You're going to save your money. Yeah. You're not going to have a car. You're not going to have fancy clothes. All your money's going into the bank to pay for education. So, but it kept you studying hard and working hard.
Sure.
Too. Yeah.
And it sounds like those summer jobs shaped you a lot. It sounds like since you were 12 years old to today, you've been working.
I have. Yeah, they did. They were interesting. I loved the money at the time. I'm just a young kid, and now I have some money in my bank. But I think when I think about the jobs I had, I worked at a car wash. I was a car wash attendant and a gas station attendant. So you learn work with money and work with the public.
Yeah, people skills.
Yeah, people skills and being out in the drive in cold weather. And so it was, work ethic and, handling money, closing at the end of the night to make sure that, all the gas we pumped, we had a sufficient amount of cash. So I had to balance the books as well. I did.
The lawn butlers?
Alsip lawn butlers. My father said that, there's a market for...
I love that name, by the way, lawn butlers. It's so great.
Our caption was give youth a chance. So they wanted to warn the customer that, it wasn't a 50-year-old professional coming, but yet a kid. And the main service was just cutting your lawn.
Yep.
Most people where I grew up in Alsip, Illinois, didn't have, fancy landscaping. Then they needed it, the things, cut and flowers cultivated, but no, just cut the grass.
Just cut the grass.
That was our basic service. Right. And then some people wanted more fancy, and then I bought an electric mower that like it would cut it like a fine, like a fine razor or something. It was great. So that was interesting. And that was how to build business and how to,
drum up business, how to follow up with customers, customer service. And it was some great lessons. Yeah. And then building Thunderbirds.
Yes. So
on the T-Bird line.
Yeah. 12 hours a day. Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, my brother, my older brother, God rest his soul, he passed away. He chose not to go to college. He had the opportunity and didn't do too well in high school. So he would eventually, didn't have the opportunity, let's say, to work for a real estate firm.
Right.
Say. So he worked at Ford Motor Company.
Yeah.
And he said, the jobs at Ford Motor Company pay a lot of money. And if you work there, you can get all the money that you need to pay your full tuition at Notre Dame, which you couldn't do that today, So,
right.
So he got me the job, and it was on Torrance Avenue on the south side of Chicago. And there was a need. There was a backlog of T-Bird orders because they had sort of went on a strike.
Okay.
And so during that summer, we had to make T-Birds 12 hours a day. So it was 2 shifts, 24 hours that the factory would run. And then, so I would get like overtime, and then we'd work on Saturday. That was like double time. And then Sunday was like 2.5 times, so we made a lot of money. It was a horrible, horrible job. Trim line was for the youngest, most agile, kind of athletic, because you had to go.
Yeah.
You had to go underneath the car, and you had to get into the steering wheel, and then you had to balance these screws and shoot the boot so that it didn't get engine fumes in there. So, and then you're laying on your back, and all these metal shavings go into your back, and it's like it's terrible. It's like I don't know. It's work for a monkey or something. But so they put me.
But that probably taught you that's not the job you want long term.
It's not the job. In fact, the guy saw me the first week. I wasn't doing too good. And he brought me up to the management of Ford Motor Company. And they said, this man, pointing to me, this man is not fit for production work. We want him fired. Okay. And the union guy that was with me said, he's a good man, and he's going to be joining the union in a couple of weeks, right? You're going to be joining the UAW. I said, right. Exactly. And then I'm thinking, I hope this guy fires me because I'm not fit for production work or whatever it was. So they said, we're going to give you one more chance, Ford Motor Company said, and we're going to have this guy stand with you for a couple hours a day, and he's going to train you, and you got 5 days. So my hands were all swollen, anything. But this guy like showed me the technique and how to do it. And then it became like master of trim line. Like I could do like not only that job, I could do like 5 other jobs. I became really good at it, I just needed a break.
So do you have a T-Bird in the car collection these days?
No, I do not have a T-Bird in the car collection, no.
That's so great.
It was great. It was, the thing I liked most about Ford was the end of the day. You're working 12 hours a day during the summer in a non-air conditioned factory.
Right.
You're sweating like crazy.
Oh, yeah.
So we used to always go across the street and we'd have a couple of beers. And it was so refreshing, and it would dull the pain, too, of, having to work 12 hours a day bending over and all that, even though I was, a young kid. But
yeah. Now, was this during your college summers when you were there?
Yeah. So, okay. I mean, I had all sorts of jobs. I, was a electrician's helper. I actually was a dance instructor at Fred Astaire.
Whoa!
Yeah. The Stairway to Fun and Popularity, that was called. And, and then I was a bartender. That was...
I heard about that. That's where you met the wife.
That's where I met my wife. This was not a summer job. It was a job I got after I got out of school. I was moonlighting. I was a job as a financial analyst, and just to pay back my student loans. I still have some student loans, so I needed a little extra money.
That's so great.
Yeah.
So, what made you decide to go to Notre Dame? Like, how did that come about? You applied to a bunch. You applied to a bunch of schools. What made obviously phenomenal school, but what else drove you?
Well,
there?
I'm an Irish Catholic from Chicago.
Okay.
So
that's pretty easy.
And so that's the school that's closest to Chicago. It's a Catholic school.
Yep.
Well known for its academics and its sports programs as well. So so that's a school that would be on everybody's list. I applied to a couple of other schools. I got into Dartmouth, but Dartmouth was very far away.
Yeah.
And it was like $600 just to fly there. And I didn't get a scholarship. They were going to give me some financial aid, but Notre Dame would give me more, and they were more expensive than Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And just getting back and forth on the plane was, like $600-$700. So that was viewed as to be, unaffordable and unpractical. So Notre Dame was, a good choice.
For sure.
Enjoyed the school, enjoyed my 4 years up there.
Well, and the alumni base there at Chicago's got to be massive. That's got to be the biggest alumni base.
It's the biggest, I would say, most, very successful, alumni base, but that's where most of the Notre Dame people will work and retire to in Chicago.
Yeah, right. So you get out of school, you go to, I believe, RR Donnelley, right? The printing company.
Yeah.
And that's where you start off your career. You got a degree in finance.
Yeah.
How did you end up at RR Donnelley? And was it just one of those deals, hey, I just needed a job?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm graduating from Notre Dame, and I need a job, and I want a job that's in the finance field because I don't want to be a printer, by the way. That wasn't why I went. But they said, no, our treasury function here at RR Donnelley is very sophisticated. You'll start in the credit department and then eventually, work in the treasury department, which is investing, our money in money markets. And then there'll be other opportunities for you maybe to run a division, like a book division or something like that.
Yeah.
So I loved RR Donnelley the moment I got there. They had this emblem of an Indian, and it was just beautifully crafted and designed. It was in an old building called the Lakeside Classics building, and so it was just like a beautiful old architecture. The Donnelley family was on site. They were just great people, nice, and good to all their employees, and really wanted you to do well at the company, and you could feel it. So I gave them the full measure of my devotion, when I was there. I loved the look and feel of it. And then they made me, my first job was as a credit analyst, which means to make a decision as to whether or not Donnelley should print that work and wait for its money on open account. So unsecured lending, if you will, trade credit, right?
Yes.
But there's no collateral value for printed material. If they don't pay, you can't take it back like you can a car.
Gotcha.
So they had a greater emphasis on making sure that the credit was good enough to pay us back. So, but what that would do, it would open up the whole file system of the history of Donnelley from RR Donnelley's relationship with Ed Luce, the founder of Time magazine.
Wow.
And within those files, you could read their correspondence and see how the relationship developed. Then to the printing of specialty magazines like Bernie Hirsch and Inc. magazine that they printed, or from National Geographic, and their long relationship with them and how they convinced National Geographic that they were the great printer and they needed that because they were the great photographer.
Right.
And then business failures, the special interest publications that would come and go. We printed all of them. You name it, there was a special interest publication for it. And and how they struggled, and how some of them made it and how some of them didn't. So the credit files gave you access to the whole history of the publishing and printing industry, but more importantly, to business itself.
Yeah.
And so you could see why people, and credit analysis is fundamental, I think, to sort of everything, to a lot of things we do in real estate.
Yep.
And it's not just about capacity of the company or the collateral that you get. It's about the character. And of all the things and that's a sophisticated analysis. You have to be very experienced to make a judgment on character, which I wasn't capable of doing, when I joined the company. But the head of credit said, of all the things that I look at, it's the character of the man or woman. They're the ones that pay you back, and they're the ones that don't.
Right.
And so that's a softer science, but there's ways to measure that.
Yeah.
And so that's something I brought with me into the real estate business, especially when we're dealing with tenants that, may need a little help in getting started. How are we going to evaluate it? Are they solid citizens? And so the character part of it is very important.
Let's talk a little bit about that commercial real estate journey. So how do you get from RR Donnelley into the commercial real estate space?
Well, I never left it. Donnelley was a job to hold me until I got enough money and learning experience to go into real estate full time. So, my father said, "Go into real estate and you'll make a lot of money." And I never had any reason to not to trust his judgments on things, which are really good. And I said, "I will, Dad. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be in real estate." So when I graduated, I needed a job, and so I got a job at Donnelley. But on the weekends and the evenings, I was combing through the newspapers looking for things that I could buy. Okay.
Yep.
And I knew what I could buy because I knew how much money down payment I had, and I knew how quickly I had to pay my dad back, who gave me the down payment, right?
Okay.
So that would drive my investment criteria. So I as the moment I graduated was the moment that I committed myself to the real estate business, even though I worked at Donnelley.
Interesting.
Donnelley was unlikely, ever to occupy my central energies and that would not be likely to be my career.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. And so on October 15th, 1979, 4 months after graduating from college, I bought my first deal, which was a 6-flat and a warehouse. It was a 6-flat, and then next to it was a lot that had a warehouse, and that would be a auto body shop that I would.
Wow.
So from then on, that would start me in my residential acquisition experience career, so to speak.
Okay.
That I would do while I was at Donnelley, and I would continue to do, and started a business called the Union Street Investment Group that did about 40 some odd transactions in the south side of Chicago in Bridgeport that would buy 2 flats, 4 flats, 6 flats, 12 flats.
Okay.
And it was an amazing time to buy that because it was before gentrification would hit the South. Yep. But it was in the South Side, but when everybody was fleeing the South side.
Yeah, right.
My bet was that bought cheap enough, it can survive this outflow, and we'll get different tenants, and then maybe they won't be as good, but they'll be good enough for the basis we're buying. And we bought these things at $5,000 and $10,000 a unit. It's unbelievable. And so, so now, when I decided to leave Donnelley, however, that was when I had the 2 and 4 flat and 6 flat business going pretty well.
Yeah. And
I knew the business pretty well. And I said, but now I need to graduate. I need to go into the commercial real estate business.
Yeah.
And literally from my building that I owned at 37th and Halsted in Chicago, I could see the Sears Tower. It's called the Sears Tower at the time, right? I still call it the Sears Tower.
Yeah, you should.
Because
who doesn't?
Sears, right?
Yeah.
So I said, somebody owns that building, somebody leases that building, that's what I want to do, something like that, not where I'm standing right now at 37th and Halstead.
Yeah.
So I said, I'm going to set out and I'm going to find the right firm that would take me. I think brokerage is the right way to start because then I can learn the business easier. I can build up a little money and then I can find what commercial real estate is all about.
Yep.
And then I'll find a way to be a principal in that too.
Right.
So long story short, I went out and I interviewed with everybody that I could. It was quite an interesting experience. And I settled with Coldwell Banker Commercial, now known as CBRE.
Sure.
They were owned by Sears.
By Sears, yeah. That's right.
Ironically enough.
Yeah.
I would look to Sears, which owned, that fateful night.
Yeah.
But they were owned by, they owned Coldwell Banker Commercial and Coldwell Banker Residential.
Sure.
So I got a job at Coldwell Banker Commercial. And my job was to work for an experienced industrial person that also did investment sales. And my job was to, what other brokers' jobs are, go out and drum up business.
Go find deals.
And try to close them. And that's what I did.
Wow.
Yeah. And I worked there for about 3 years. I did well, not as well as they do these days. These brokers at CBRE.
What part of Chicago did you have like a geographic submarket you were working?
I did. I focused on the O'Hare submarket, the office portion of the O'Hare submarket.
Yeah.
That's, what I cultivated and cold called and understood.
Yep.
Now, I would, however, take any business that came my way.
Sure. Sure.
So I would end up selling shopping centers, industrial buildings, and, big buildings, small buildings. And so and I had a lot of listings and they were surprised to see how much business I could generate. So it was a very, it taught me commercial real estate. It taught me, it gave me the introduction to, successful principals that buy for their own account.
Yeah.
And it introduced me to all the more subtler aspects of commercial, such as how leases are done, the idiosyncrasies in all the leases, and the high level of complication that business had versus what I was doing, which was apartment buildings, which is simple.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think was, when you look back at your brokerage career there at CB, like what do you think it was your experience doing all that residential beforehand that really gave you the boost to really have some really good success pretty quickly in the commercial sector?
I think so. I mean, I did a couple things. I think, yes, I think that experience in residential is a microcosm of everything that you'll face in the real estate business, whether it's commercial, whether it's residential.
Right.
We have to find the buildings. We have to have an investment criteria. We have to get them financed. Then we have to manage them. We have to collect the rents and eventually have to sell them. So that whole process, you gain an appreciation of how hard it is to be an acquisition person.
Yep.
Finding deals that met my criteria was difficult. Finding my residential criteria was very difficult.
Yeah.
Getting the money was difficult. My father could only afford so much in down payment.
Yeah.
So I relied on alternate methods of finance, like purchase money, second mortgages, so sellers taking back some money together with a first mortgage.
Yep.
I learned how to do the financing of it.
Got creative.
It gave me an appreciation for management. So, these buildings don't collect the rent themselves.
Yep.
Somebody's got to go and collect it. It gave me appreciation for the physical side of it, roofs and parking lots and stairs and, how do we, the bathrooms and the kitchens and, I bought it off this old Greek guy and he said, you feel intimidated, don't you? You don't know what to do, all these units. He said, let me make it easy on you. Let's take one unit and we'll strip it down and we'll rebuild it up. And then you'll know, if you know one unit, you'll know all 32.
That's right.
So you'll be very comfortable with every aspect of repair. So I got an appreciation for the physical plant of properties.
Yeah.
And how to market and lease, for tenants as well.
Yeah.
And how to deal with difficult tenants and how to deal with good tenants. And so, I had a huge leg up on everybody.
Yeah.
And then I would read books about real estate. I read books from people that made a living buying real estate. These are almost like self-help success books.
Yep.
Which have fallen out of favor, but many of those are written very honestly by entrepreneurs, honestly wanting to tell their story about how they got where they got.
Right.
So I read some of those books, and they told about how their methods of buying, methods of management. And then I read books about asset management. They didn't call it asset management. It was just property management, how to run a residential. There was this guy named Kelly from New York. He was really tough, but super shrewd, like he would do things like, okay, we have to replace the carpet in the hallways because it's getting a little rough around the edges. We find ourselves with no money. Okay. So what Kelly would do would be he'd pull the carpet down to where the instep that nobody stepped on would now be the landing for, the carpet. And so that's how we would get twice the amount of use out of the carpet. So I would read different things like that.
Yeah.
And one of the things he said, which is rough, but we applied it during our COVID days. He said, when a tenant comes to me with a question about the rent collection policy, I tell them it's really simple. The rent's due on the 1st, it's late on the 2nd, and I'm going to evict you on the 3rd. Okay? That's the policy.
Yeah.
Right. So that's, and I like, I like the cadence of his sentences, but I wasn't sure that was for me.
Yeah.
But I found out that's the only way to do it.
Yeah.
And Kelly spoke of, he had experience collecting rent in the Bronx and in Brooklyn and tough places in New York. And it considered him the best in his craft. But I would read books like that too.
Yeah.
So in addition to, being a real estate owner and operator of residential, I was also a student to read the real estate books. And there's some really great ones out there.
Yeah.
And these aren't like super academic textbooks. They're stories of practitioners.
Sure.
And how they make it.
Yeah. I mean, Trammell Crow has an amazing one called Master Builder. Everybody should read that book.
I've read Master Builder. The writer could have improved. His prose style is hard to read. But Master Builder, I have it in my library.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great
book. But it's a great book. Talks quite a bit about Trammell Crow and the man.
Yeah.
And it's a great story.
It really is. How do we get into, so you start doing investment sales. Tell me how you really dive into the industrial world. Talk about that transition.
Yeah. So I'm at CB and remember that my ultimate objective is to become a principal in real estate.
Right.
So CB, just like RR Donnelley, would be a stepping stone.
Yep.
To where I would eventually like to get to. Okay. So I'm doing okay. I'm doing good at Coldwell Banker Commercial. And then the guy that I was working for, gets an offer from Jay Scheidler, a national owner and operator headquartered in Honolulu.
Okay.
But he had a confederation of partnerships across the United States where he would sponsor a person from a city and give him half of the equity, and that person would source deals for Jay Scheidler. And so the guy that was mentoring me at Coldwell Banker left to take that position. And then about, a couple months later, he called me, my former mentor, and he said, I have a position for you. I mean, you'll have to interview for it, and Jay will have to decide whether he wants you too, but it's called the Vice President of Acquisitions for Chicago in the Scheidler Group. And what we do is we're value-add acquirers of real estate. And here's our criteria, and it's an eat-what-you-kill shop, just like Coldwell Banker Commercial was.
Yeah.
You will get a very, very modest salary, but what what you're supposed to do is find deals with deep discounts to fair market value. And then our IRR standard will be an 18% unleveraged IRR, which are obviously hard to find, right?
Right.
Okay. So when I got that job, I was then in the commercial real estate business, and I was getting equity.
Yeah.
Too. It would give me equity for finding these deals.
Yep.
So that was really the final transition into commercial.
I'm in the principal side.
And I'm in the principal side. Now, when it comes to industrial, it was sort of like this. Jay Scheidler, I said, I've made a decision, and it's this. The office buildings we're looking at today are in substance foreclosures. This is a bad industry. I said this was like back in 87. I said, there's so many buildings out there. I don't think that they can get absorbed in less than 10 years. And you're on this, you're on this flywheel of having to provide tenant improvements and leasing commissions to these tenants, and you have to redo lobbies and elevator cabs.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of CapEx and a lot of stylistic obsolescence. We have to. So I said, it's not the business for me. And then I said, on retail, I don't understand enough about the symbiotic relationship between retailers and why, how to lease a center. And there's just much better people at it. It's a complicated business.
Yeah.
And it's pretty expensive, and the cap rates are pretty low, and it's not for me. Residential, I like that, but you don't. You said, I don't want to buy any building that people sleep in. Okay. So we didn't buy those. I said, but industrial is interesting because, Jay, I mean, it's, they're all the things that we like about industrial today. It's critical facilities. They're mission critical for the tenant. And so there's less defaults. People pay the rent with a higher frequency in industrial than they do other property types. It's just a known fact. It was a business for which there was not much institutional demand for it at the time. It wasn't an accepted institutional asset class.
Yeah.
So we found I said to Jay, we have less competition here. The REITs of the world or, equitable life insurance companies, they're generally speaking not buying this type of product.
Yeah.
And so the good news is we can get in inexpensively.
Yep.
And so we can have both cash flow and good capital appreciation. I said, he didn't like that because it limited the things that we would see. I said, but you can hire another person in Chicago if you'd like to, and I'll just focus on industrial. And I said, Jay, I take a Calvinistic approach to people that lend me money. I want to pay them back, and I don't think I can pay you back if I focus on office buildings and retail. I think we can make money. I can pay you back if I do industrial. Other people may be better at those product types. Office, I think, is a complete loser, and has been since the mid in the 80s, the mid 80s. It became a loser then, and it has been ever since. Retail, no, but I'm not sophisticated enough on retail. So I said, that's not.
You just like those complicated rectangles, right?
I just don't want a rectangle. Exactly. Exactly. So that's how I got started in it. And so I focused my investment efforts on buying industrial with Jay.
Yeah.
And it worked out really, really well. And as a matter of fact, other partners that Jay had that bought industrial, theirs worked out well too.
Okay.
So we knew that industrial was a good product, and we knew that we had a good track record.
Yeah.
And then Merrill Lynch would come calling. So we have Jay has a national organization, and Merrill Lynch would say, are there any areas in your business, Jay? You own retail, you own office, you did own a hotel, you own industrial, that we might take public because you're a good and big national sponsor. Is there anybody, so let's think about it. And so Jay's, and I and a couple of others said, industrial. That's what we ought to do. We have a decent size industrial portfolio.
Yep.
And we have a great track record, and we've monetized a number of these things. And we're a national sponsor. I think that is what we should attempt to go public on. And there was 2 companies at the time that were also public. One was Security Capital Industrial, now known as Prologis, right? Yeah. And then there was CenterPoint, which would be ultimately purchased by CalPERS. Those are the only 2 people that were public. One was national.
Right.
One was just Chicago, CenterPoint.
Yeah.
But we would be kind of an ink spot stain on Central going to the southeastern part of the United States. So we would cover sort of Chicago and then a lot of things eastern. So we had more geography, and then we had local people in those markets too, so we could tell a pretty good story. Then we also would go to Minneapolis. So my focus on industrial would serve both Jay and I very well. And then Merrill Lynch said, I think you guys got it. Now, it's how we got public is maybe not the subject of this podcast because it's long and complicated. But anyway, we made the decision to go public.
Yeah.
It turned out we didn't have enough properties to go public.
Okay.
So we would hook up with Nomura, and then we would also use the UPREIT structure to get us the bulk that we needed. So we had 1/3 of the portfolio we needed. We needed to buy another 1/3. Nomura gave us the money to do that, and then we split some of the IPO proceeds with them.
Okay.
And then we would then also get other people in the United States who owned industrial portfolios to join us in going public. And they would get paid by taking stock when we went public in the form of non-taxable units called the UPREIT structure.
Right.
And so that's really how we launched. And we went public, I think it was about $750 million in gross value, half of that debt, half of that equity.
What year was that?
That was June 24, 1994. It's amazing how I remember.
You're great with dates.
Yeah. So we went public then. I was sort of like the head asset manager. We didn't have any other title, and that's what I was for the national company. And then one of the other more senior partners was chief operating officer. He would leave. Then I would become the chief operating officer.
Okay.
I considered myself to be a good operator, better than most because I had more operational experience.
Sure.
I leased all the buildings I bought with Jay. I was the property manager.
Okay.
I wouldn't relinquish control over the operations at all. I did the same thing with my apartments. So I had an appreciation for property managers and asset managers, and I could do it myself. I knew a good job from a bad job.
Yeah.
So they made me the chief operating officer.
That's
and
great.
I knew the business pretty well cold.
Yeah.
So there wasn't any, a lot of guys get that position and maybe they come from a finance background and they haven't collected rent in their life. They haven't leased properties, but I knew it cold. I knew the physical side of it.
Right.
I knew the leasing side of it, the collection side of it, all the things that a chief operating officer would do. And then, things went well. And then, however, the board wanted to make a change at the CEO level. They did. And they asked our existing CEO to leave, and then they made me the CEO. And that was in November of 1998.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
And then that run lasted, about 10, 15 years or so?
About 10, yeah. So I would leave First Industrial in 2008. So it was about 10 years. I was 10 years serving as CEO. And in that time, we tripled the size of the company.
Yeah.
We had a good stock return until we didn't. I left at the beginning of the great financial crisis.
Yep.
Well, maybe about 6-7 months into it. But I would say, there was not much I could do about it. We had built a great and successful company, and First Industrial is alive and well today.
Sure.
That company taught me many things without which I wouldn't have been qualified to restart a firm at Brennan Investment Group. It gave me access to capital markets, equity providers, debt providers. It taught me all about the national markets in the United States, the industrial market. I got introduced to all the great developers in industrial, all the great brokers for industrial, all the great investment brokers like Jack Fraker, for instance. So I would get privileged access as the CEO of First Industrial to anything that I wanted to know. And I wanted to know everything I could about industrial real estate. I wanted to know about the occupiers' viewpoints, about the shareholders' viewpoints, about demographers' points of view, about where the great markets would be. I loved it. I was a kid in the candy store learning all of this stuff. So that privileged seat that only the CEO gets or members of senior management get would enable me, if I wanted to, pick up the mantle of being a great student and a great practitioner of industrial. I would have that golden opportunity. And then it would teach me about management of people as well. Because you've got a big national, empire, so to speak. So, how do we hire? How do we fire? How do we motivate? How do we compensate? All of that is vitally important in running. If you can't do that, that's really where, firms fail, I think, is in the conduct of how they treat their employees and how they nurture them and keep them and motivate them. And that was a very important lesson that I didn't learn as a solo entrepreneur when I was working with Jay. It would require me to be thrust into, the throngs of a large national company. And I studied management a lot too. I went from studying industrial to learning about what were the best ways to keep people, what were the best ways to educate them, what was the best ways to teach them their craft. And I dedicated myself to that. And again, that, only at First Industrial would I have had that opportunity in my career to do that. And that prepared me for the job that I have now.
And you've rebuilt another empire now with Brennan Investments. What would you say are the big differences in being a public REIT versus the family privately owned world?
Well, that's a long story.
I know that's a long.
I'll keep it simple. I would say that as a public company, the shareholders that are going to buy your stock have their minds made up on what it is that they want to own. So so it's sort of advice to a public company. They know what they want to own. They want to own modern industrial buildings in the top 15 markets in the United States that are 20 years old or less. And have certain functional characteristics. And so you have to accept that their minds are made up before you step into the arena. You're stepping into an arena with a shareholder constituency that pretty much knows what it is they want. If you deliver that to them, with the return and the appropriate risk parameters that have been respected and paid attention to, you will have a happy shareholder base. If you don't do that, you are in the unenviable position of trying to give 10,000 shareholders an education on what they got wrong. So that's one difference. Their mind is made up in the public company world. So in other words, so if you're going to be successful in that arena, you have to be willing to have that as your investment strategy. And you have to be able to make money given the confines of what your shareholder base has done to you, so to speak.
Gotcha.
Not blaming it on shareholders at all. Just saying they have their minds made up. They know what they want. So if you want to be a great operator within those confines, that's the place for you. So being a public company, a private company, however, experimentation is not only permitted, it's the lifeblood of what we do. The entrepreneurial experimentation with new markets, new product types, new ways of crafting deals. So the private markets, experimentation is allowed. Experimentation is the lifeblood, and it's encouraged, or else the firm dies unless it can innovate. So if you try to do that,
so you get to color outside the lines a little bit.
You do. You definitely do. And if you try to do that in the public company arena, they'll say, this isn't what we signed up for.
Right.
You have to do it this way. Whereas a private company, I'm free to pursue my own visions of how we can create value. I have to be right. I better be right, however.
Right.
And I need capital sources to follow me there. But if I have a thesis, I'm able to pursue it. Now, and a couple of those theses were, number one, that we saw the fall and rise of America after the great financial crisis. The auto business was on its back, but then General Motors, we saw, would get out of bankruptcy.
Right.
And the automakers would cut a deal with labor that would allow the auto industry to get great. We saw the return of the residential business, which had been on its back. That's one of the things that caused the great financial crisis. We saw the oil business and America's ability for self-sustaining energy would come out of that particular era. We saw our banking industry on its back. Our whole money center banks and a lot of our investment banks were no longer able to provide capital. So we had both a financial crisis and a business crisis. So, one of our theses was that manufacturing will return. And so we had these portfolio buildings, and I said, we should buy these buildings, and here's why. Number one, we're getting it at a 9.5 cap rate, roughly. Okay. Number two.
That usually checks the box.
Right. So that's good. And we can borrow it like 5.5.
Right.
So we'll get, 18% return in cash flow. So all we have to do is hang in there 5 years and we've gotten our money back.
Right.
So number two, we'll buy it at like 1/3 of replacement cost. Number three, the tenants in there are middle market tenants. But this was in 2010, we decided to buy it. Actually, sort of the end of 2010. So the interesting thing about this is that those tenants in there paid rent during the great financial crisis, right?
Yeah.
So when we looked at the accounts receivable aging, they were all paying. I said, so if they could pay in the great financial crisis, and we're sort of 2 years out of it right now,
right,
or a year and a half out of it, they probably can pay now.
Exactly.
Right. So I think that we've gone through a baptismal of fire and the tenants are still standing. So I don't think we have a credit issue.
Yeah.
We got a great cap rate. And then the other thing we made the seller do was hold back. We made them hold back an amount that was equal to about 30% of our equity in case certain tenants that we identified as potentially problematic started taking water. So I said, we should kill it. And so then what happened was, more and more manufacturers would stay in the United States because of the use of robotics and automation. Mm-hmm. So that would allow them to compete with China, who had low-cost labor. If we've got a robot, that's the only way to beat low-cost labor. So more and more of the plants, I walked the shop floors of every single building that we bought. It was an acquisition. We bought 42 buildings.
Wow.
And so I walked the shop floors of every single one of them, and every one of them said to me, we're going to start with robotics and automation. We're going to start to automize this one line. We're going to, and so we're competing.
Yeah.
And so I saw that the thing that hurt us most in manufacturing was being attacked by, really interesting operators in the plant. So that was an example of a thesis that got financed that would go on to, prove its mettle as many more manufacturers have entered or stayed in the United States.
Right.
And we would make a fortune on that deal. And then we did, probably 8 others. And there's a couple we haven't monetized, but we did very, very well on those too. Another thesis was that corporate real estate might be one of the last bastions of inefficiency and a great opportunity. And corporate real estate was because the owner of that was a non-professional who did not know how to renovate, did not know how to lease, did not know what the values were if they did, and their CFOs or treasurers or CEOs would not permit an operating company to go into real estate investment. It would take up too much of their capital.
Right.
So that makes them at a significant disadvantage when they sell. Because if you, as a real estate guy, see your building go empty, you know how to lease it.
Right.
And you know how to sell it once you get it leased. You're familiar with all the metrics of valuation and how to do it and everything else, right?
Yeah.
That cannot be said of the corporation.
Yeah.
So they don't have 5 different doors to escape out of. They've only got one, which is the sale door.
Yep.
And so as a group, they represented an industry that we could help, if you will, or we could buy things less expensively from.
Yeah.
And they're also oftentimes low basis owners. They've owned the property for many, many years, right?
Right.
So some of them haven't fully depreciated. So long story short, and because they owned about half the stock, that would be a market that we would attack at Brennan. And so we bought about, I think it's like roughly $400 million we did in 24 transactions. We got an average IRR of about 44%.
Wow.
And it was one of the best things that we ever did. Now, if you would announce in a public company that we're going after corporate real estate, they'd say, well, that's very, opportunistic and episodic. There's no, and where are you going to find it? Well, for people that own it, and how is it routinely, sold by Jack Fraker? No. Sometimes yes, sometimes by the user broker, sometimes, Okay, and what does it look like? Well, it's all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
It's rectangles, or it's manufacturing buildings, or it's excess industrial land, or it could be freezer cooler buildings, or it could be truck terminals. They're like, we don't understand that.
Yeah. Speaking Chinese.
No mas. We're the public shareholder, not all of them, but many of them would say, that's not for us. Yeah. That's something very difficult to understand. But for us, who are industrial practitioners, most of all of our adult lives, that dynamic, that seller dynamic, and the product type, we're well acquainted with, and we can deal with that. So that would be another example of experimentation that wouldn't be permitted in the public markets, not without a severe penalty to your multiple.
That's an incredible breakdown of the differences, and I'd like to shift, and I know we got to wrap up here soon because your time's limited. But the reason why we're sitting here is because of the Grascamp Real Estate Center for the University of Wisconsin. Tell me a little bit about how you got involved there, and you've played such a major part in growing that real estate organization to now it's respected as, if not the best in the world in terms of real estate. I'd love to hear just a little bit about that and how that came to be.
Well, like most things, it kind of comes by accident and luck, So when I left First Industrial, the quid pro quo for my golden parachute was that I not compete against First Industrial for 1 year, which was a very fair and in fact generous, non-compete period of time.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So I, however, wanted to get back into the business, industrial real estate business, and I felt that my absence for a year or 2 years or whatever it was, would be very detrimental to a reentry into the industrial real estate business. It would not be good for my prospects. The longer I'm away, the harder it is to come back.
Sure.
So, that was my belief, and I was just kind of thinking about what I should do. And I got a call from Bill Ferguson, Ferguson Partners, one of our industry's most prominent headhunter. And he said to me, I have an opportunity for you. I know you've got a non-compete. Why don't you take a look at it? And maybe that's something you can do while your non-compete burns off. And he said, you're not going to, you're going to be with a bunch of professors and all that. And you're not going to really like them very much. And I don't know if they'll like you. But just hang in there for a year or two and everything will be, then you can go off and do what you. So I went to the university. I went up, interviewed, passed the audition, got the job, as I said. And then I liked everybody I met at the university. I loved the professors.
Yeah.
They were great.
Yeah.
And I loved the students. And I loved the learning atmosphere. I love all the people that would come up to our school, top practitioners of our craft, top real estate people, and talk to the students. And I got to hear it too, you know. Right. It was a laboratory and a playground for real estate learning and experimentation. And so I ended up going up there and not just liking it, but loving it. And I feel like, I had good relationships with all the professors there as well. And then I said something to him that was maybe as important. I said, I'm going to start my own business after my non-compete burns off, which is in about a year. So I have to go back to work. But I'd like to stay here. But I would like to make a suggestion. Okay? What I'm going to be doing when I start my business back up, and I showed him my business plan, I'm going to be calling on all these private equity firms, all these insurance companies, all these banks, so forth, right? I'm going to be calling the who's who to get capital to restart the business. Right. I'm going to meet the top brokers. I'm going to meet with the top occupiers. I'm going to meet with all the people that are really important to real estate. I'm going to network with them. And when I do that, I can speak about the merits of Wisconsin on my nickel. Yeah. Okay. I'll pay for all of it. But I still want to be able, I didn't want to leave. Yeah. It was sort of like it was also important to me because I felt like it gave me, a certain stature that other people didn't have. I was the head of the Grass Camp Center. Yeah. So it was good for my business too, but it would be very good for the Grass Camp Center. Sure. So they said, you've got a deal, Mr. Brennan. That sounds great, but we want to cut your pay in half. I'm like, okay, cut the pay in half. It wasn't really about the money anyway. And then what that would do would be, then I was now the executive director meeting with all the top heads of real estate. Yep. And so they would come to the university, or they would sponsor our conferences, or they would be guest speakers, or they'd be on panels and so forth. So the university really benefited from sort of me going back to work. Yeah. And then me funneling them to all of our educational venues that they had. Yeah. So so the real story, of my involvement in Wisconsin was because of my departure from First Industrial. But the reason that I got to stay as long as I did was university made a wise, cut me a major exception. Yeah. Allowed me to work part-time. Right. And so that would help my business. It would help theirs. And then we developed, a number of programs, number of applied, you heard today about the applied curriculum that the University of Wisconsin has. So I would teach 2 of those courses. It's awesome. And then we would develop Grass Camp on the Road, which would be our movable educational feast to spread the gospel of Wisconsin education all over the United States. Yeah. And we'd meet more people. we had 2 conferences that were there before I got there, but the type of people that would come, because I was out networking for Brennan,
Sure.
I would meet a hell of a lot more people. And so the quality of those conferences rose.
Yep.
And then we would do, we had something called a housing conference at Wisconsin, but we turned it into, and we called it today an economic summit, where it's about the housing industry and they get top speakers there. And so every aspect of, I think, our educational mission got a little bit better because they had people like, not just me, but I would invite practitioners who would, associate themselves with the university or frequent the university more often or come to our conferences, and would just lift our program up, and it would lift our reputation up.
Yeah.
And so for the last 3 years, in 23 and 24 and 25, the University of Wisconsin got the '1 ranking 3 years in a row. And we did get it in 2012, but then we would lose it, and then we wouldn't get it back until I think 2023.
Amazing.
So that's how. So just everybody rowing together.
Yeah.
I mean, and the people that are at Wisconsin. I mean, I think when they saw that they could get a person like myself, a practitioner, to make to work at the university, enjoy it, make contributions, then they would hire other people that were equally as good as me.
Right.
That were C-suite REIT executives,
Yeah.
or portfolio managers, Tim Peer from Heitman,
Right.
that knew how to invest in public securities, and that was one of our applied educational courses that we have there. But the whole host of great people from industry, would be attracted too. So it opened their eyes to, I think, how to improve the program, and they did.
When you're talking to young kids, what's the most important piece of advice you give them about getting into commercial real estate?
I don't know. I don't know if I could give you any one thing. I said my mind was made up.
Sure.
Because of my father. I decided that, to me it was a sacred undertaking.
Yeah.
I didn't know any better. I just believed what my father said, and I as I said, I had no reason to doubt the wisdom of it. So I usually say that if you are enthusiastic about it, then do it.
Then
just do it and stay with it. And I don't give advice or tell them what to do, but if you like it, then get into it, and if you persevere and can, exert yourself to do what your bosses tell you to do or what is good, you will be a success. It's hard to fail if you're doing something that you like and you're hitting it pretty hard.
Yeah.
Right? So, the likelihood of failure is really low. Yep. And so I think most of I was surprised when I went to Wisconsin, by the way, to see how genuinely enthusiastic the students were. It wasn't like, I want to go into real estate. I don't know. I'm going to check it out. No, I've made my decision to go into real estate. They're like, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I certainly wasn't like that. I mean, my father told me and I believed it, and, but I didn't carry that passion on my sleeve like a lot of these kids. So I think if we, if you like what you're doing, continue to do it.
Yeah.
And we'll hear at Wisconsin, through our own programs and through our guest speakers and people that you'll meet, you'll open up opportunities for you to get into the industry.
Yeah.
So I just tell them that.
Yeah.
I mean, if I have, 2 days with them, I'll tell them a lot more. But
Sure.
I think, if you like it, stay and then exert yourself.
Yeah.
There's, way to get to the real top is you've got to make significant sacrifices.
Long hours, weekends.
Right. You really, there's no I'm going to be a real estate tycoon, but, I'm not going to work on weekends.
Yeah.
I need to go on vacation for, 2 months out of the year. I don't want to save money. I want to live in a fancy neighborhood. I don't want to, and you have to save money too. You know,
right?
I mean, you really do. So really, I'm not making any sacrifices with my time, with my family, with my energy, with my savings. I won't live prudently while I'm trying to build up the business. Very important, you know, for me to start Brennan, I had money, right?
Yep.
So if I had blown it all because I was a CEO, I wouldn't have been in a position to have the reserves. So it's not unimportant.
Sure.
To be thrift is not an unimportant, quality.
Yep.
But that, to make the ultimate sacrifice, to work all the time, as much as you can, and that's not a popular thing to say.
Sure.
To a young person.
No, it's not. But you got to if you want to. If you want to get to where you want to get to, and in the quickest manner, you got to work hard. There's just no two ways around it. I'll tell you one funny story. Yes.
You're going to repeat this because this was a joke, but kind of. And my wife now, she was my girlfriend then. I took her in front of my building that I just bought in October 15th, 1979 to show off in front of her because, I was a man on the way up. That was at
811 West 37th Place.
That's correct. That's right. And I said,
is that building still there?
That building got knocked down in favor of another building they would build. So I went to the building and I said, you see that building? That building's number 1. And you're number 2. When we have kids, they're number 3. I think she slapped me or something
she like that. She probably did.
But, that statement is not far-fetched, from sort of the way you got to live. Now, of course, I love my wife, and of course, I love my kids and everything else, and they're really number 1. But, you
got to dedicate a lot.
The face of family life will look very different.
Yes.
It'll be like, this guy's, working all the time.
Yeah.
And so there was humor in it.
For sure.
But there was a truth to it as well.
All right. I usually ask like a lot of small questions. I'm just going to ask one and we're going to wrap it up. What is your favorite Chicago food? Is it the deep dish pizza? Is it the hot dog? Is it the Italian beef? And where are you going?
I eat ambiance. I'm not a food guy. I'm not a food guy. I'm a
all right. So what favorite restaurant? Where do you like to
go? Bruno's. It's called BRUNA''S. Bruno's, named after an Italian woman that first started that.
Okay.
And it was a corner bar that they've turned into a restaurant. It's been there now for, 70 years. They have wonderful Italian food. But what they've done to distinguish themselves is this little neighborhood, bar and restaurant has some of the most fabulous wine collections. They have like a Massetto wine that's like $2,000 a bottle. Like, now I don't buy that all the time,
Right.
Only on special occasions.
On special occasions. Yes.
Like he's distinguished himself by having not only great food, but a great wine list. Amazing. And he doesn't mind because he drinks it himself. It's fine with him. So Bruna's is,
that's incredible.
The ultimate. Yeah. And we sit in like the bar area and the atmosphere is great. It's an old Italian neighborhood. But you have all sorts of, people coming from downtown as well as the neighborhood. It's an interesting mix of people.
Chicago is a wonderful city, especially in the summertime. Love it up there in the summer.
For sure.
I don't know. I don't think this Texas boy could live there in the winter, but
it's a little cold.
But it is such an awesome city.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I love our city too.
Mike, thanks so much for taking the time to come on today. This was a lot of fun, bud.
Yeah, it was.
We'll do it again sometime.
I'd love to. I love your office too, by the way.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're in Texas when you're in your office.
I appreciate it. Thanks again for the time.
Yeah, thank you.